Right, good morning, everybody. This is a meeting of the Licensing and Appeal Subcommittee, Craven District Council. I think what we'll do, Hannah, is we'll take the first item on the agenda before I do the introduction. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. So we've got no apologies for absence.
Thank you, Hannah. Appointment of a chairman for this meeting. Councillors?
I move Councillor Myers.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Declarations of interest. Anybody? No. Right, so although we've all, the main parties have all introduced themselves in a slightly earlier meeting where we just looked at some footage, I think it's incumbent to go again. So I'm Councillor Simon Myers, I'm Chairman of the Licensing Committee, this subcommittee today. I am joined by Councillor David Ireton, Councillor Chris Morby, who's the Vice Chairman of the Licensing Committee. Present also is Alex Strickland, the legal advisor to this committee, Tim Chadwick, our licensing manager, Emma Hayton, who is the officer, Sharon Lord from Environmental Health at Craven District Council, Hannah Scales, who's the secretary to this committee. Also present is John Cohen, who's the licensing solicitor representing Mr. Greaves at this hearing. Mr. Greaves is present as well. Stephen Burrow, who is a resident of Providence Quarter and speaking on behalf of a number of the residents there. And then I see a Miss Greenwood, who I think has corresponded with me and I think the rest of the committee with his views on this review. Who is left? Mr. Forshaw, I don't know, Mr. Forshaw. Do you want to identify yourself, or are you just a member of the public?
Supporting Mr. Greaves.
You're supporting
putting a positive.
Right.
Hi guys. Yeah, we have 3 properties in Providence Quarter, so I believe I can speak on behalf of Providence Quarter also. Yeah, that's it really.
Thank you. That's great. So we all know who everybody is, and hiding in the background is Guy Close, who is keeping us in check and making sure this meeting is recorded live. So I'm going to ask the licensing manager, Tim Chadwick, to outline what this meeting is
about. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the comprehensive report before you is detailed, so I'll only briefly summarise its contents. I know this subcommittee will have already read in great detail what is laid out before you.
I could say, Tim, sorry to interrupt you, I should have beforehand, everybody can rest assured that the members of the committee in very good time, all carefully, all the there, including letters in support of Mr. Greaves and letters from those who are in support of this licence. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the purpose of the hearing, and for those who have only just joined, and for those viewing the hearing publicly, the interested parties have all viewed some clips just prior to coming onto this session, which I'll refer to as singing in the street, football fans, and urinating. The Ref and Whistle premise licence 848 is a premise licence located centrally in Skipton on Court Lane, and has held a licence since 2019. The licence has been brought before you today for receipt of an application to review the premise licence, seen at Appendix N. This has been instigated by Councillor Noland of Craven District Council and Councillor Dawson at Skipton Town Council. Both are present today. The reason they have instigated the review is on the grounds of the premise undermining the licensing objectives, public nuisance and public safety. Members will no doubt know that public nuisance is not defined in the Licensing Act, so it retains its broader meaning and should be understood in its widest sense, and therefore may cover major disturbances affecting the community through to less significant nuisance. With regards to public safety, licence holders have a responsibility to ensure the safety of those using the premise as part of the duties under the O3 Act. This concerns the safety of people using the relevant premise rather than public health. Members will be aware that on reading the application to review and hearing the relevant representations present today, that any decision made must be done so with a view of promoting the 4 licensing objectives. These are laid out at point 2 of your report. The options members may take when determining any action is required is also laid out at point 2 of your report. Members are no doubt aware that planning and licensing do form 2 distinctive and separate regimes, and it is the licence holder's obligation to ensure compliance with both regimes. However, given the initial grant of the licence made by a licence subcommittee in 2019, members made a decision with the knowledge of the planning requirements, see Appendix A for the decision notice. For this reason, this information has been included again within this report. Members will find at Annex 1 a chronological of key events for the premise. This will hopefully assist you in following the information evidence supplied in the report and today. Lastly, just brought to my attention by Mr. Cohen, under section 7, the numbering has slightly been updated in regard to the Licensing Act guidance. So 2.17 in the report should be 2.21 of the licensing guidance, 9.42 should be 9.43, and 9.43 should be 9.44. As all parties are present who have made representations, I will not come further at this time on any of those representations. So Chair, for now, that is my very brief summary of what is a detailed report, which I know you've read in great depth, and I welcome any questions.
And do you have any questions for the licensing manager at this stage?
No, I don't, Chairman.
I was just asking Mr. Cohen.
All right.
Sorry, it's all right. You're muted, Mr. Cohen.
Still muted.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello,
Yeah.
Mr. Cohen. You're
Sorry,
having difficulty.
apologies. I am. I've got my video preview on the screen and it keeps saying waiting. So I can only, unfortunately, see myself. I can't see, I suspect you in the background. So I'm having technical issues, I'm afraid, Chair, at this end.
Do you want us to just stop for a moment while you log out and log back in and see if that helps?
Do you mind?
No.
Chair, please?
No, I don't at all. Please.
Thank you. I presume it'll be the same login details.
Yeah. But Hannah, perhaps could you just resend them to Mr. Cohen? Hannah, please.
I do apologise.
No. It happens with these remote meetings. We are very used to it. Yeah. So if we just pause everybody for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, and let Mr. Kern have a chance to get back. So we will resume in 5 minutes. That's it.
Thank you, Chair.
No, but when you come out, don't they have to then send you a code for you to get back in?
But he won't let me do anything. I'll have to.
Right, Mr. Kern, I think we have you. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah. Thank you. Oh. Yeah. That should be it. You seem to be unmuted.
Sorry, can you hear me, Chair?
We can now, yeah. That's great.
Chair, firstly, my apologies for the technical issues, and I'm very grateful for the 5 minutes to get back in, as it were.
No, not at all.
Much appreciated.
No, not at all. It's very important that you can see and hear everything that goes on in this.
You're very kind.
So if you have any problems at any stage, or anybody for that matter, please, raise a hand and,
Chair,
sort it out.
can we just, we've got a couple of cameras hidden, so I'm just checking that everyone has come back, everyone else has come back.
Yeah. Alex, are you there? Right.
Just about, Chairman.
Very good. Well, thanks, everyone. Mr. Kern, I was just asking you whether you had any questions for the licensing manager at this stage.
Well, Chair, not so much a question as I don't know if this is the appropriate time to mention it, but there has been email correspondence between myself and Mr. Chadwick and Mr. Strickland concerning the extent of the hearing pack. While I fully accept and understand that the licensing committee should be informed of the issues, as it were, my respectful submission in that correspondence was the hearing pack, I should say, goes in effect way beyond what was necessary to ensure the licensing committee was fully reasonably informed vis-a-vis certainly the documentation in relation to planning, because of course it won't have escaped your attention, Chair, that planning have not made a representation, yet a not inconsiderable section of the pack relates to, in effect, planning issues, the noise management plan, etc., etc. But as I say, one of my, as it were, strict legal points would be planning have not made a representation, and it's not, with all due respect to licensing, their place to, in effect, intentionally or otherwise, make a representation on planning's behalf.
I think probably you can rest assured, Mr. Kern, it's just background, and it tends to be in these committees that we see a lot of background information. The officers tend to think that the committee is entitled to all relevant background. It doesn't mean they're going to have it at the forefront. You can rest assured that the planning permission was granted, and planning enforcement is not a matter for this committee. So in fact, funny enough, we've all been on a course, Mr. Cohen's. We've been well educated in the difference between our role and that of planning. Okay. So, but yeah, your point is taken on board, and don't worry. I think Alex will prevent us from.
Yeah.
No disrespect is intended, Chair. I promise you that.
No.
Chair, just on the back of that, I think I can give Mr. Cohen the assurance that the decision will be made on the licensing objectives and nothing else. And we understand the point. I think that's being made.
So don't worry. This is not an ad hoc. Thank heavens, branch of the planning. Otherwise, I would not be here. Right, Alex, could you just set out the timetable? I think that you've,
yes,
in
Chair,
consultation, drawn up to give everybody a fair say, so everybody knows the time.
Yeah, I mean, just one preliminary point, and I'm indebted to Mr. Cohen for his assistance on it. Just in terms of section 2 of the report, where the options are set out, I'm also reminded that paragraph 1117 of the section 182 guidance does provide for the committee to administer a written warning if the committee thinks that's appropriate, and there's further guidance around that in paragraph 1118 that I can sort of make members aware of if needed. But just to make that point, on the wider on the wider point, first of all, just to remind all members, Chair, that they will be aware of it, of the need to keep an open mind on this matter right up to the point of decision. Members will be aware of that. Just in terms of the process, it is a matter for you, Chair, but what I would suggest is, on the basis of sort of previous discussions, is that there's 20 minutes for the applicant to make their case, and then questions from committee members and anybody else after that. So 20 minutes for the applicants, 10 minutes then for the environmental health officer, for Sharon to make her points, 10 minutes for the interested party, Mr. Burrow, to make his points, and then 20 minutes for Mr. Cohen on behalf of the licence holder to make his representations, and with questions from the committee and anybody else, Chair, if you're agreeable to it, after each party has made the representations, and then maybe 5 minutes at the end for the applicants, and 5 minutes for Mr. Cohen on behalf of the licence holder. I think if you're agreeable to that, Chair, I think that will ensure everybody's got a fair way forward. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Kern has his hand up.
Sorry, Mr. Strickland, we do appear to have forgotten the two other persons who have made representation. Well, two of the other persons who have made representations in favour of the premises, who are, I understand, a party to this hearing this morning.
Yeah, Chair, sorry about that. My understanding is, but I'm happy to be guided to the contrary. My understanding was that they were going to form part of your case, and that you were going to include them when you made your representations. Is that not the case?
Well, without wishing to appear greedy, Mr. Strickland, I didn't think they were going to impinge on my 20 minutes.
Right.
Well, listen, let me cut this. I'll cut this Gordian knot. They can have. I think, in fairness, 5 minutes each or 10 minutes between them, however they wish to divide that up. So they've got the same as Mr. Burrows speaking on behalf of the objectors. Yeah, is that fair?
That's very fair, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, thanks for that, Alex. I think my fellow councillors and I think that's very fair if everybody's happy with that, and that's the way we'll proceed. So who is going to speak first on behalf of the applicant? I assume one of our councillors.
I don't know who's going to go first, Chairman.
Between the two of you, so whichever.
Can I go first?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm, as mentioned earlier, Councillor John Dawson of Skipton Town Council, representing this ward. I've been involved in this case for, well, really since the Planning and the Licensing Act original applications, because at that time I was also the Craven District Councillor for the ward, and therefore contacted by a number of the residents at the Providence Quarter. So I've been in regular contact with a number of the residents, and indeed with Councillor Noland, since he was elected in my place in 2019 as the district councillor. And we have both been kept informed by residents of the issues that there have been. I think it's fair to say that those residents and each of us had hoped it would be possible to work together, licensee and residents, as good neighbours, bearing in mind the residents' homes are so close to the premises, and obviously in the town centre one accepts some disturbance, but there needs to be a reasonable relationship between the two. And unfortunately, as we've seen in the report, there have been numerous incidents over the years. We've focused in our application on the more recent ones. Other people have made other representations to the subcommittee. And of course, the problems seem to have culminated in COVID breaches and action being taken as a result of that. It's fair to say our grounds for concern are focused on the true licensing issues of the prevention of public nuisance and public safety. And that's set out in our application. And as has already been said, I'm sure members of the subcommittee have read and considered already the written evidence from ourselves, from concerned residents, and indeed on behalf of Mr. Greaves. I hope that when they've also heard all the oral evidence, they will come to a decision based on the evidence and take one of the options that are available to them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dawson. Councillor Nolan, do you?
I just briefly, I echo everything Councillor Dawson has said. I do like to recognise that the residents that have objected have not at any time wanted their business to close down, just wanted the business to follow the regulations. And I think also a lot of other businesses in Skipton have tried very hard to follow the COVID regulations, and it seems the Referendum Whistle hasn't. And that was my concern to speak up, really to back up the other businesses that have tried their best in very, very difficult times. I've no wish to see this business close down. It sells sort of just the type of beer I like drinking. I like to drink in town. I like to walk into town and walk home. It's entirely good to see a business like this. I just wanted it to follow the regulations the way others have done. And I think what appear to be breaches of the licensing regulations regarding the behaviour customers, the antisocial behaviour, I think, well, I'll leave that to the committee to decide. You've got the evidence. I've seen many videos over the last couple of years and information concerns raised. So I just feel as the councillor that it was worth bringing this forward for your committee to review, and I'll leave it in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nolan. If I could say, actually, on behalf of the committee, we're grateful to the for bringing this matter for review. It's part of their role as councillors, and it's a thoroughly responsible thing for them to ask us to look at this. Thank you both very much. Mr. Kern, do you have any questions for either of the two applicants?
Sorry, Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Right, thank you. Sorry, yeah, just thank you. Really to both councillors, if I may, Chair. I understand, and please correct me if sorry, I understand, councillors, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that neither of you live in Providence Quarter. Is that correct?
I can tell you that neither of them live in.
No.
No, I used to work there many years ago when it was Skipton Building Society, but no.
I live about 100 yards away.
Excellent. That's great. Super, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors.
Sorry, apologies. One.
No, of course, Mr. Kern. Yeah.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. Just one further question.
Yes, please.
I do apologise.
No.
Sorry, based on that, councillors, I assume the information contained in the review application has been secured, received from from those who do live in Providence Quarter. So it's in effect second-hand, if I may put it that way. It's not from your own experiences.
It's from residents, information we've received from residents as ward councillors.
Yeah, admittedly, I've probably walked past. What? No, exactly as you say. Yeah, reported by residents.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Councillors?
That's right, thank you.
Councillor Morby, do you have any questions? either of the two applicants?
Not at this, no, not at this moment. Thank you, Chair.
No, I've taken on board what they both said, Chairman. I don't think I have any questions to put to them. Thank you.
I mean, I should say, for the benefit of those who perhaps watching this meeting remotely, and for others who are present, that we have all seen the applications for a review and all the matters contained in there, the various complaints that councillors have put before this committee. So it's a very thorough application in front of all parties. Right, moving on then. I think we will go to Sharon Lord from Cohen District Council. Sharon, you've got 10 minutes.
Thank you.
Doesn't mean you have to fill it.
Thank you. The Environmental Health Service is responsible for the enforcement of various coronavirus regulations, which were introduced by the government from March 2020 onwards in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Obviously, the department's been inundated with complaints and trying to provide advice and guidance to businesses to comply with this legislation. On Friday, the 20th of September, following complaints in relation to lack of social distancing by customers, I carried out a visit with the licensing manager to the premises. The premise license holder was on site at the time of the visit, and at that time, COVID-19 measures were in place. The premises was relatively quiet. There was probably about 2 customers in there at that time. And on this date, no breaches of relevant regulations were witnessed. The license holder was actually provided with advice and guidance around working safely during the pandemic. The sort of approach to enforcement in the Environmental Health Service is to a gradual approach to enforcement. So we will actually advise, guide, support businesses to comply with legislation. On the 2nd of December, Craven moved into the Tier 2 high alert restrictions under the health protection coronavirus restrictions, all tiers of England regulations. And there was various restrictions included at that time. On the 7th of December, Environmental Health received 6 complaints, including photographs of alleged breaches of coronavirus regulations. These related to incidents that had occurred on the premises on Saturday the 5th of December and Sunday the 6th of December. Excuse me. Concerns included no social distancing, mingling of customers inside and outside the premises, customers stood at the bar drinking, no face coverings and no food being served. On Wednesday the 9th of December, I visited the premises with the licensing manager. During the visit, it was noted that no efforts were being made by management to ensure any level of social distancing. There was no provision of substantial meal to enable the sale of alcohol, and the premises were not being operated in a COVID secure manner. A number of contraventions of the Tier 2 high alert restrictions were witnessed by officers. Following a discussion with the legal department and due to the case of the severe breaches, on the 11th of December, prohibition notice was served under the health protection all tiers regulations. The notice required the licence holder to cease to carry on the business of selling alcohol for consumption with immediate effect, and this will remain in force until all steps have been put in place to enable the premises to trade in accordance with the legislation. Thank you, and I welcome any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And can I say, aside from the particular case, how very grateful the council is and residents for all the hard work that Environmental Health have done during the pandemic. It's been a real challenge. You're a small team, and I hope you haven't been overloaded. I know you've been very, very busy. I'm grateful.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Cohen, do you have questions for the officer?
Sorry, Chair. Thank you. Yes, sorry, I seem to have to unmute myself every time. Apologies.
No, don't worry.
Yes,
as long
Chair,
as
if I
we
may.
can all hear and see.
Yes, Chair, if I may, please. Sorry, is it Mr. or Mrs. Lord?
Mrs.
Mrs. Lord. Thank you for your representation. Just to clarify one or two matters, if I may. So as I think you said during your initial visit, or following complaints on the 25th of September, you found the premises was COVID compliant.
Yes, at that time. The visit was carried out at 10 to 2 on the 25th of September, and the premises was very quiet at that time.
Sorry, the visit was carried out?
Sorry, on the 25th
when,
of Friday,
Mrs. Lord?
Friday, the 25th of September at 10 to 2 in the afternoon.
Oh, sorry, 25th.
Yes. And there was probably about 2 customers.
Sorry, my apologies, I misheard you. Apologies.
Okay.
So it would seem the complaints that you received, certainly at that time, were unjustified.
There was 2 customers, approximately 2 customers in the premises at that time. So it was compliant at that moment in time.
Indeed. So I repeat the question, the complaints you'd received, it's unclear when those complaints were received. So from your own experience on the 25th of September, those complaints were unjustified at that time?
At that time.
Yes, sorry, just for clarity on this, Mrs. Lord, were the complaints made at lunchtime on the 25th, or had they been made at some other time?
Well, let me just have a look. We received the actual complaint by the licensing department on the 18th of September.
And did it what did it relate to? What date and time?
It was a lack of social distancing by customers.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Kern, but just for clarity.
So sorry, Mrs. Lord, you said you received the information from licensing in relation to the 18th of September.
That's right, yes. That came into the department on the 18th of September. Had that information come from licensing itself? Had the licensing officer witnessed these alleged breaches, or had they received a complaint from a third party? It was from a member of the public via the licensing department.
Thank you. Just with regard to, thank you. Just with regard to the 7th of December complaints, they're quite detailed. No face coverings, no food being served. Again, was this were these complaints received from colleagues in the council, colleagues in the licensing department, or from other persons, third parties?
Third parties. One came via the police. A person had reported a complaint to the police, and then the others were third parties.
And so had the police themselves witnessed these alleged breaches, or were they all via third parties?
No, they hadn't. It was a third party.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, you say, I'm sure this is the case, you visited the premises on the 9th of December at 4 o'clock.
That's correct.
As I understand it, present was Mr. Greaves, the DPS and premises license holder.
He was, yes.
And I understand he was working by himself at the time. He was alone, working alone.
Yes, he was.
Now, my instructions are, Mrs. Lord, that obviously when you and your Mr. Chadwick, I think, came to the premises, Mr. Greaves went to sort of deal with you to address your concerns, or and therefore the premises itself, or sorry, the patrons in the premises were clearly not being served or not being addressed, if I can put it that way. You can only do one thing at one time. And when he was dealing with you and Mr. Chadwick, clearly the customers were left unattended, if I can put it that way.
Yes, we did actually go and have a chat, because obviously we don't chat in front of customers. But at the time when we walked into the premises, there was mingling of households. At that moment in time, households were not meant to mingle. And due to the sort of small area of the premises was full. There was clearly no food being served at some customers. Some customers were totally intoxicated, and there were customers walking in without masks. And Mr. Greaves discreetly said to two gentlemen who just walked in 5 minutes before we landed, asked them to leave. They had walked in with no masks, but they were stood at the bar because there was nowhere for them to sit downstairs.
But as you say, Mrs. Lord, excuse me, those two gentlemen concerned were asked to leave.
They were asked to leave, but very discreetly by Mr. Greaves. They were stood at the bar because there was nowhere for them to sit downstairs. And at that moment in time, it was order from the table and drink and eat at a table.
No, I get that, but if the gentlemen weren't wearing masks and weren't content to wear masks, face covering, is it not right and appropriate for Mr. Greaves to say, gentlemen, if you're not willing to wear masks, please leave, which is what he did?
He just actually said, I'm not sure what he said to them, but he asked them to leave because myself and Mr. Chadwick had turned up.
Oh, no, that's unfair, Mrs. Lord. My instructions are he would have asked them to leave in any event, whether you and Mr. Chadwick were present or not, because they were not willing to, excuse me, wear face masks.
Chair, can I just for clarity add to the patrons that have been referred to had walked in when we'd come on to the bottom of Court Lane, so it was a time it took for us to walk up that lane into the premise, at which point then the events which you referred to took place.
Mr. Chadwick, thank you for that, but I'm afraid without wishing to unduly labour the point, Mrs. Lord, two patrons you say came in, and I'm sure you're right, came in without masks, and they were duly asked by Mr. Greaves to leave, the appropriate action to take.
They were stood at the bar, whereas you're not meant to stand at the bar, you're meant to order from a table. And we'd walked in probably about 3 or 4 minutes after the two gentlemen walked in. And they were still at the bar. So they hadn't gone and sat at a table to be served. They were stood at the bar.
Yes, the patrons were in the wrong and they were asked to leave, the appropriate action by Mr. Greaves. But I won't labour the point any further.
No, I think we've got the point.
My instructions are thereafter. Indeed. My instructions thereafter are that Mr. Greaves contacted either, I think, Mr. Chadwick, Mr. Chadwick, to say that given the financial position, etc., he was going to close the premises voluntarily. This is before the prohibition notice was served.
No, it was obviously through the discussions on the day, he explained it'd be very difficult for him to open. Prior to then, an email was sent asking him whether or not he'd be confirming whether he'd be remaining shut, to which he confirmed yes. And then the prohibition served as the formality to confirm that. But that was
so I think
a very lengthy discussion by Sharon Lord with Mr. Greaves, where obviously she ran through the responsibilities, which obviously she's involved with, of which I think it then became apparent Mr. Greaves was unable to adhere to that.
Well, I understand. I understand, and I wasn't a party to the conversation. I fully concede. Excuse me, but my instructions are that yes, Mr. Mr. Greaves accepted that given the COVID regulations, given the requirements, given the social distancing, etc., that had to be attended to or complied with, and rightly so. That Mr. Greaves said, he would, rather than perhaps have customers darken his name by not complying with the regulations, he would close, and he closed prior to the, as I say, the prohibition notice has been served. I think that's timescale is correct, Mr. Chadwick.
Yeah, correct. On the day, he said verbally he would not be reopening because financially he couldn't make it work. And then the prohibition notice was served as a formality then following that. Correct.
Great. Thank you very much. No further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kern. Councillors.
Yes, if I may, Chairman.
Yes, please.
Sharon, Mrs. Lord, sorry. Can I get this clear in my head that you gave Mr. Greaves considerable advice way before this incident that we have been dwelling on?
Yes.
You gave that advice well before that.
Yes, I did, yes, on the 25th of September.
Okay, thank you. That's all, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Ireton, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Quite clearly that Mr. Greaves asked the two men to leave the bar because they weren't wearing masks. Were other customers in there adhering to the COVID rules at the time?
Not at that time, no. They were seated.
No, other customers. This is not the two men.
Yes, the other customers. None of them was stood up, so therefore there was no requirement to wear a mask. But they were actually sat mingling next to each other. They were sat within, well, probably even like less than 30 centimetres next to each other from different households, which was against the law.
So they're quite clearly they weren't adhering to the rules.
No.
You know, we've heard the explanation of the two men that came in who were asked to leave. We take it that that was because they're not wearing masks. Quite clearly, other customers in there were not complying with the regulations.
No, they weren't.
Now, you said that it will remain in force for the prohibition order until steps have been put in place to enable the premises to trade in accordance with the coronavirus regulations. Is it possible in that bar? I don't think it's a very big bar. I've never been in it. It doesn't look as though it's a very big bar. Is it capable of actually fulfilling the requirements of serving food, etc.? Is there room for kitchen, substantial meal, I believe, isn't it? It's not just pork pie and peas. In your opinion, is the premises large enough to be able to run that under the coronavirus rules at the moment?
The coronavirus rules, I mean, obviously we're in lockdown at the moment, and it's going to be difficult to know what legislation, no legislation has been brought out as yet going forward when premises are allowed to reopen. And I know that there is no requirement for a substantial meal when they do open. At that moment in time, the meals that were being served would not be classed as substantial, and the food, the premises have not even completed a food registration form, which I shouldn't really be bringing up because that's not covered in my sort of representation. From a social distancing point of view, to enable you to.
You've just muted, Sharon.
And you muted yourself.
Sorry, just my keyboard. To enable them to to carry out social distancing adequately, then you wouldn't be able to have that many customers in the premises.
Yeah. What I'm trying to get at is would that premises been able to serve food, would it have been able to run as it should have done under the rules that the government put down, or should they have actually at that point closed the doors and said we cannot fulfil the rules that the government's put in place? And that's why I want to know, is the premises large enough to be able to put a kitchen in to serve substantial meals?
They do have a small kitchen, but they've undergone no sort of inspection from a food safety point of view. There was no food registration, so therefore, really, they should not have been serving food.
Yeah, so therefore they should have been closed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you very much.
Chair, can I just add just one thing, just in terms of a general mod? Obviously, I think any premise can probably adapt to become COVID secure, regardless of it's how financially viable as well. That is. I just want to put that in. Even if you can only fit one person, you can probably do it COVID secure. It's just the viability of that.
I don't know whether I was going to say, Mr. Kern, do you have any questions from those matters arose?
Yeah, yes, please, Chair. Just a few measures, Chair, please. Mrs. Lord, you said in answer to a question from one of the other councillors, they provided substantial advice to Mr. Greaves on the 25th of September.
Yes. Yes.
Now, thank you. And you quite rightly make the point that on the 2nd of December, Craven moved into Tier 2 high alert.
Yes, that's correct.
And so in effect, the rules had changed, had they not, between the 25th of September and the 2nd of December?
They had, yes.
So, and this is no criticism, Mrs. Lord, I promise you. So in effect, the rules had changed, and therefore the information you had provided Mr. Greaves with on the 25th of September, which I'm sure was current, had become out of date by the 2nd of December and beyond.
It had, but obviously there are websites, our social media would provide up-to-date information, and it's up to the person that runs the premises to obviously find out what it is they need to do.
And Mr. Greaves had contacted. Mr. Greaves did contact as well to ask about information regarding substantial meals, if I remember correctly there.
Yes, he did.
Well, can I say, I'm presuming that I speak to my fellow councillors, but I'm sure we all think that the duty is on landlords to inform themselves of the regulations when you enter a different. It's not for Craven District Council's environmental. Who need landlords? They have a responsibility to the public. I get your point, Mr. Cohen, that it had changed. I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's not intended to be a criticism of environmental health, but
Chair.
Yeah.
No, Chair. Sorry, absolutely not a criticism of Mrs. Lord or her colleagues or the council in any way. But in answer to a previous question by one of the councillors on the committee, in respect of was substantial advice previously given, the answer was provided was yes, which on the 25th of September. But my simple point, however badly put, Chair, is that the rules have changed by the 2nd of December and beyond. And I fully accept the point, of course, that it's up to Mr. Greaves to keep appraised, or any premises, to keep appraised of the changes and to comply with them as the rules requirements change. No criticism at all of Mrs. Lord or her colleagues. Just, sorry, Chair, with your indulgence,
yes,
one further point, if I may. Thank you. Mrs. Lord, I think you, if I heard you correctly, that when you visited the premises on the 9th of December at around 4 o'clock, customers were seated.
So, yes, they were, but they were actually mingling with. They were actually mingling with other households.
Well, obviously I wasn't present, Mrs. Lord. I'm bound to ask how you know there were different households, how you know they weren't in the same bubble, the people who were allegedly mingling.
I've actually lived in Skipton all my life, so I do actually know quite a lot of people in the Skipton area. Therefore, I do know that they were not from the same household.
And I repeat the question, how do you know they weren't in the same bubble?
They could have been in the same bubble. When you've got 7 people that are sat together, they're not all going to be in that one bubble.
Oh, well, in your opinion, Mrs. Lord.
In my opinion. We also actually, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, did you approach those customers to ascertain were they in the same household or in the same bubble?
We did not know.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I just have one question, Mrs. Lord. Where was Mr. Greaves when you and Mr. Chadwick entered the premises?
He was behind the bar.
Was he wearing a mask?
He was at that time.
Anybody got any questions arising from anything? Councillor Ireton.
Unmute itself, Chairman, sorry. Yes, we'll carry on the 9th of December, Mrs. Lord. People that were in there, whether they were in the bubble or not the same bubble, etc., there was no provision of a substantial meal being served. So therefore, they were breaking the rules at that time, even if they'd been in the same bubble.
Yes, there was paper plates with quiche and a couple of crisps on in front of the odd customer, but not every person had a plate in front of them.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Kern.
Sorry, Chair, I do apologise, but I'm bound to ask Mrs. Lord, did you visit the kitchen to see what was being prepared in the kitchen?
We actually gave advice and guidance to Mr. Greaves following that, but the food wasn't actually being prepared in the kitchen. It had bought like a little oven that was at the side of the bar, and he did say that was the first time that he'd served quiche that day, but quiche and crisps.
And, well, I'm told and salad, and in your opinion, that wasn't a substantial meal, and you didn't visit the kitchen upstairs near the
I didn't actually see any salad at that time.
Anyway, I think we have.
Maybe you've been eaten, Mrs. Lord.
Pardon?
I think we have the point, Mr. Kern. We also have the point that you didn't have a food hygiene certificate or anything food in the first place. So, yes, Mr. Cohen.
Sorry, I do apologise, Chair, but as I understand the food registration requirements or legislation, there's a lead-in time, as it were. One has to register the kitchen within a certain period of time, not prior to, as I understand it, and I'll stand corrected, not prior to commencing food preparation. One registers the kitchen, and then the local authority may or may not visit to see if it is, I suppose, compliant or up to standard, for the want of a better phrase.
Well, Sharon may be able to assist with that, but I can assure you we always visit. But Sharon, what is the procedure
The procedure is you complete a food registration form 28 days prior to trading.
Right.
And then a food inspection will be carried out, and also applicants can contact us for advice and guidance. In this instance, a food registration form was sent in April 2019 and was never completed and sent back. In September at the visit, advised that he hadn't completed a food registration form and signposted him to the Craven District Council website. And to this date, no food registration form has been received.
Sharon, can I ask, from my ignorance, is that just for food or drink?
That's for, well, food, and even drink is classed as a food. So yeah, it would be for, even if you just like a wet pub, then you would still need to complete a food registration form.
Thank you very much for that. Any other questions for Mrs. Lord? Right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Lord. I think next we have Mr. Burrow. You'd like to unmute yourself, Mr. Burrow? That's there. Now we've got you now. I would say, Mr. Burrow, and as I've already said, you can. I mean, you've got 10 minutes, obviously, and it may be that you have plenty to say, but do rest assured that the committee have read all the matters in the bundle. So all the various complaints and so on. So you've 10 minutes, but you don't need to itemize everything because we've seen.
No.
Okay.
I'm going to be as brief as possible. It might help members if they look at page 125 and 126 of the report while I'm doing this. Getting the balance right between business and residential interests was always going to be a big challenge when they are in such close proximity as they are here in Court Lane, which is at best just 12 metres apart, according to the planning department. Councillor Rose said at the last planning meeting that these premises were presented to planning as something akin to a gentleman's reading room. The mitigation measures that were put in place to allow this gentleman's reading room to be able to operate so close to residential properties, these included the planning conditions, the licensee's own noise management plan, the licensing conditions, and the licensee's own operating schedule. A number of these have been ignored, which has caused problems and frictions with many nearby residents. Noise nuisance has increased as more people began to socialise on the public street outside the bar. The licensee reaffirmed his assurances to planning on the 14th of July 2020 with his updated management plan and new planning permissions. However, behaviour at the bar has noticeably deteriorated since, and I think it's important to probably concentrate on what is happening after this planning change, because that is what is more relevant today. The gentleman reading room now appears to be the sports bar that the licensee assured everyone it wasn't going to be. We've seen more and more incidents of football chanting, etc., out on the street. The present day problems can be highlighted and summarised by the images on page 125 to 127 and the example videos you were shown earlier. Now, there were only 3 videos shown, but there are a number of other videos available in the information that was sent to Tim Chadwick that sort of highlights how regulations have been ignored, etc. The images, if you look at the 15th of August 2020, the images below that from It's actually from Saturday 19th of September. I've inadvertently put August there instead of September. And then on page 126, it's from the 29th of September. The images show the lack of control that appears to exist at the bar. There's been a lack of control over noise nuisance. There's been a lack of control over prohibiting drinks off the premises, as can clearly be seen on the 15th of August photographs. There's been a lack of regard for the planning permissions and noise management plan, as there seems to be no control over the noise that's been experienced. There's been a lack of regard for the locality and nearby residents. And most concerningly of all, there has been a lack of regard for the COVID-19 regulations. These have all impinged upon the promotion of the licensing objectives, mainly public safety, the prevention of crime and disorder, and the prevention of public nuisance. Page 126, the events of Tuesday, September the 29th, came just 4 days after advice and guidance had been provided by Environmental Health on COVID-19 measures, as Sharon Lord has said today. The events were even more concerning as there were at least 4 patrons there that were from areas that were at COVID-19 restriction levels, which banned households mixing indoors and outdoors. The video evidence supplied to the licensing manager does show that the party at the Ref and Whistle continued for over 2.5 hours. Many of the supporting representations say that there are no problems at the bar and that it is COVID safe. These images, the example videos seen earlier, and the visit by Environmental Health and Licensing on 9th of December 2020 have shown clearly that this has not been the case at all. COVID-19 breaches have also been witnessed by other councillors. Other skips and licensees have also expressed their concerns regarding the Ref and Whistle to at least one of these councillors, as confirmed in his representation, which is in Appendix Z, page 144. It is not just residents that have been alarmed by this non-compliance, which has impinged on the licensing objectives of the prevention of crime and disorder and public safety, and has clearly put the health, safety and welfare of its customers and the wider community at risk during this pandemic. For planning enforcement to issue a final written warning, amongst others, and for Environmental Health to serve the bar with a prohibition notice, does highlight that the concerns raised by local residents living close to the bar have not been baseless, as has been claimed. The bar's own CCTV, when it has been working, has also confirmed this. There are serious issues at this bar. We fully understand that the licensee has invested a lot into his business, both in time and money and in effort. It is therefore surprising that the licensee himself has consciously chosen to risk his license in this way, even after clear advice and guidance has been provided by the council. I would like to add that there has not been a determined campaign by residents to close the bar down, as has been suggested. The email trails contain clear statements to the contrary. I've given an example here of page 61, but I think if you've read the report, you'll know that we have said a number of times, we don't want the bar to close, we don't want him to lose his licence. Residents have deliberately not reported antisocial incidents to the police or made official reports to Environmental Health so as not to trigger the immediate premises licence review that was intimated by the chairman at the original hearing. We have been trying to avoid this. Residents have just been trying to get the licensee to run the bar as he promised and was instructed to by both planning and licensing. We had hoped that there were sufficient control mechanisms in place for this to work in this locality and to avoid a licensing review. It is not the residents who have ignored planning conditions, licensing conditions, the noise management plan and the COVID-19 regulations. Residents do believe the onus is on the licensee to comply with these. It is a shame that he appears unwilling or unable to do so. And I've just got a question for John Cohen. It's a similar question that he asked John Dawson and David Nolan, do the supporters that have accompanied you today, do they live overlooking the bar as some of the residents do?
Well, Mr. Burrow, Mr. Cohen isn't here to answer questions.
All right, sorry.
But it's you've raised that, and I'm sure we can raise that with the gentleman who are here to speak.
Thank you.
But you made your point. Yeah. Now, Mr. Kern, do you have any questions for
One or two, Chair, as you might imagine. Yes, please.
Of course.
If I may. Good morning, Mr. Burrow.
Good morning.
Thank you. Is it correct, Mr. Burrow, that you did object to the granting of the premises license to the referendum whistle in the first place?
Yes.
At the initial hearing to grant or not grant a license?
Yes.
Okay, so you did, the position, and it's your prerogative, of course, you simply didn't want a licensed premises across the road from your apartments?
No, that's not the case.
Well, why did you object then, Mr. Burrow?
Because we had concerns and we raised those concerns with the licensing team, and it was for the licensing team to make the decision based on concerns raised.
But sorry, I don't mean to appear, frankly, not very bright, but if you object to the grant of a license, it's because you don't want the license to be granted.
No.
Chad, sorry, Chair, can I just say something? Someone can object to a license and not be against a license. If they think when the licensing objects are being undermined, Chair, people might just seek assurances through the conditions, as we see routinely, Chair, through applications made.
Thanks, Tim.
Well, unfortunately, sorry, Mr. Chadwick, unfortunately, I haven't had the benefit of seeing Mr. Burrow's representation. So, but if you say he didn't object to the license being granted in its entirety, as it were, and simply sought safeguards, I'll happily stand corrected.
I'm not saying, I'm stating that someone can object in the widest sense possible to a license and not be opposed to that. I'm not talking specifics of that, just as a wider context.
But then by the same token, Mr. Chadwick, people can object, and I've done this for long enough, and people can object, and it's their legal right to do so, and do object to the grant of a premises license.
Sorry, what? I'm not sure what the...
Sorry, no, I'm simply making the point. Some people object
Noted.
to a grant of a premises license.
Anyway,
They want some
I'll let you
continue. People
continue.
object because they don't want.
It was for clarity for the Chair, that was all.
Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, carry on, Mr. Cohen. You have your answer from Mr. Burrow, so you can perhaps explore that a bit further if you feel it's not clear what he's saying.
Chair, I'm simply, however badly, I'm simply seeking to make the point that Mr. Burrow is one of the interested parties. I'm looking at the decision notice at page 11, and interested parties, Mr. Burrow, Councillor Dawson, well, they're down as interested parties, I assume, either objecting to the grant of the premises license or seeking perhaps assurances that appropriate conditions and safeguards will be put in place. But as I say, I concede, I have not seen.
No, well, in fairness to Mr. Burrow, then let's ask him. What were you after, Mr. Burrow, at the licensing hearing?
Hopefully that it was similar to what he'd put forward to planning, which was this gentleman's reading room, as Councillor Rose interpreted the presentation, and opening hours of 12 till 9, which is what he'd submitted to planning. Whereas when he submitted his application to licensing, it was wildly different hours.
Well, I think let's clear that up, Mr. Kern.
Well, I'm afraid it hasn't, Chair. What was granted by licensing is clearly a matter of public record at pages 13, etc. of the hearing pack. had Mr. Greaves applied for something that was out with the planning permission, and of course, as we all know, and I'll be making this point, I'm afraid, repeatedly, planning could have objected. And they chose not to. And they haven't objected today, or in respect to this review hearing. So we hear these spurious allegations of repeated breaches of planning, yet there's the one party who could tell us whether they believe there's been breaches or not is planning, and they haven't even seen fit to make a representation. But I'll try not labour the point, Chair. I promise you. Going back to questions, if I may, of Mr. Burrow. Mr. Burrow, as I understand it, the complaint started, I think, around early July. An email from you at page 42 complaining about pavement signage said to be at both ends of Church Lane.
They actually started on page 41.
Oh, looking at page 42, you complained about pavement signage. Is that correct?
You mentioned that this is where I started a complaint, and it was actually page 41, not page 42.
Thank you. Did you complain at page 42 about pavement signage?
Yes.
And the pavement signage, I think, was at each end of Court Lane. Yes. In what way, you mind me asking, in what way does that affect the enjoyment of your property?
It has an effect not on my property, but it is highlighting an issue of public safety.
So, well, let's look at, if we look at page 43 of the pack, I think I presume they're your pictures, Mr. Burrow, of the pavement signage in question, page 43.
Yeah.
Have you got that, Mr. Burrow?
I do, yes.
Right. Well, it's very clear. There's two pavement signs in each photograph. One for the excuse me, for the Ref and Whistle, and another for, I think, the Tapas bar next door.
Yep.
Casa Pequeña.
That is
Do you mind me
correct.
asking, did you complain about Casa Pequeña's pavement signage?
This was highlighting issues that the pavement signage was starting to proliferate, which was then causing a problem.
What problem is that? Did that cause, Mr. Burrow?
Well, you can see there from the pictures that the council spend time and money putting in special paving for people to cross safely there, but the access to it is actually impeded by pavement signage.
And I repeat the question, Mr. Burrow, did you complain about the Casa Pequeña pavement signage?
Well, that previously existed.
To the council?
That previously existed.
But it's no more or no less of a nuisance than, Mr. Burrow, it's no more or no less of a impediment or nuisance, as you allege, than the signage from the Ref and Whistle, is it?
But it's adding to it.
So I repeat the question, did you complain about the Casa Pequeña pavement signage?
No, I highlighted the issue as a growing problem.
Well, okay. Thank you.
Check. Could I just maybe assist by clarity? When the pavement sign issue came up, a wider general question was asked about what is the district council's policy on signage. Obviously, not specifically referring to the other premise Mr. Cohen refers to, and as a wider context. While I don't want to get into a debate of signages, is something North Yorkshire County Council deal with. As you can imagine, as you can imagine, across the district, it's one of the issues which obviously falls much lower down their priority level. And highways tend to deal with cleaning up the pavement. But I get the questions Mr. Cohen's asking. Just for members, that's the wider background.
I think we all are well aware of that issue and the fact. But I also understand, Mr. Cohen, your point is plainly made. Mr. Burrows has it in for the ref and whistle, and will complain about anything, I suppose. Isn't that what you are subtly trying to arrive at?
Well, Chair, you're very polite, as always, whether subtly or unsubtly, in essence, but I'll continue on to labour the point, Chair, if I may.
No, do, of course, yes.
Forbearance, of course.
I'm not prohibiting you. I have your point, that's the...
No. Well, indeed, just at the risk of labouring the point, is it not the case, Mr. Burrow, you also complained about people using mobile phones on page 44 of the hearing pack?
Yes.
So people using mobile phones is a cause of clearly irritation or complaint to you?
It was just another issue that someone had raised where people were coming across the road and almost being under people's balconies when they're making mobile phone calls. And as you know, from making mobile phone calls, people do raise the voice sometimes. So it was just highlighting an issue.
Okay. Your prerogative, of course, Mr. Burrow. We then go on to probably something a bit more substantial or meaty, if I may put it that way. The provision of music in the premises. I'm looking at page 47, Mr. Burrow, of the hearing pack. Page 47.
Yeah.
You complained, I think, to Mr. Chadwick, sorry, the licensing authority via Mr. Chadwick, about the provision of live music in the premises.
A resident had previously raised the question with planning regarding...
A resident...
Pardon?
Sorry, apologies, a resident other than you?
Yes. They'd raised a question.
Took up the...
Do you want me to answer the question?
Please.
Yes, please, Mr. Burrow.
Another resident had raised the issue with planning because the ref and whistle had advertised live music, and they just queried planning whether or not live music was allowed when the planning permission or the licensee's noise management plan said that it would be just background music played at a level of 60 decibels at the most. Planning's response was that no, that this is not allowed under his planning permission. And they did contact Mr. Greaves regarding this, saying that no, live music is against your planning permission. And yet Mr. Greaves went ahead with live music events.
Well, Mr. Burrow, thank you for that, responding to a question I hadn't yet asked. But on page 47, there's a reply from Mr. I think it's Mr. Chadwick, saying to you, thank you for your email dated the 4th of December reporting potential infringements of the premises license. No reference to planning. This is page 47. And then Mr. Chadwick replies, and I'll paraphrase it without hopefully doing it a disservice, the playing of live music under the Live Music Act is permitted, and that's summarising it. But again, you were seeking to complain about the provision of live music as a possible licensing infringement when no such infringement was taking place under the Licensing Act.
That was due to a confusion regarding the noise management plan which we thought had been stated as part of the licensing conditions.
Yes, if I could assist here, Mr. Kern, I'm sure you've seen it in the papers. It seems to be the case that Mr. Burrow and other residents thought after the original grant of a license that the same condition that was contained in the planning permission relating to noise management was a condition of the license, which it isn't. And so it's a typical example of the irritating crossover between planning and licensing, confusion that arises there. So as far as licensing is concerned, yes, live music can be played because legislation says it can be played, but there are restrictions on the planning permission that have nothing to do with licensing. So I think that's why Mr. Burrow was about that. Eventually, it was clear.
Sorry, Chair, quite so. No, Chair. But it's interesting that Mr. Burrow seemed to have complained about a possible infringement of the premises license, yet not complaining about any possible noise nuisance from the premises. It's looking at where can I find an infringement or a possible or alleged infringement of any piece of legislation, and I will, as you more subtly put it than I, Chair, seek to complain about it. And of course, I would be making the point that despite all the allegations, repeated allegations over a period of time, environmental health from a noise perspective have not made a representation. So we hear numerous references to noise nuisance, but environmental health from a noise nuisance perspective have not made a representation.
Yes, I have that point. Thank you, Mr. Kern.
Sorry, just one further point, if I may, Chair, for the moment. Mr. Burrow, I think you complained about Mr. Greaves possibly putting, I suppose, some liquid of some sort down the drains outside his property.
Yes.
I presume there's certain pictures in the pack that I'm afraid I haven't noted the page. Apologies, but I take it this was viewed from your balcony or from your apartment, I guess.
Page 124.
Thank you. So I'm just. Thank you. Indeed. I don't suppose you know what liquid was being put down the drains.
Are you talking about when the barrels were there, or are you talking about October the 3rd?
On each occasion, Mr. Burrow, you don't know what liquid was being put down the drain.
Well, the first three pictures, I think, undeniably beer barrels.
I'm not disputing that, Mr. Burrow, but you don't know what the liquid, I repeat the point, you don't know what liquid was being put down the drain. You assume, let's be very fair about it, you assume it was not water. You assume it was something other than water, slops or in the barrel, whatever. But you assumed, you thought, another opportunity to get a complaint in, whether it's water or anything else, I'll make a complaint.
No, the Environment Agency confirmed that it should not be putting anything down the public storm drain, and that they offered Mr. Greaves guidance not to do this.
Well, I suppose I'm about to ask Mr. Burrow, in what way, if it was something, if Mr. Greaves was in the wrong, he shouldn't have been doing it, I fully concede, but in what way did this impinge on your enjoyment of your property?
This is part of impinging on the licensing objectives of public safety. It was.
That wasn't the question, Mr. Burrow. How did it impinge on your enjoyment of your property?
It was annoying and worrying to see this being poured down the public storm drain and causing pollution in the local Waller Hill Beck. And also,
you're very simple-minded, Mr. Burrow.
And it's also a public safety issue, leaving the barrel in the middle of the road for half an hour at a time. I don't think this is just a simple, this is just picking on something to complain about, as you're suggesting.
But Mr. Burrow, you also complained about, did you not, a receptacle being put on the pavement for fag ends, litter, etc. You complained about that too, didn't you?
The bins on the road, yeah.
You complain about that as well.
And if you look on the page 127, you can see the state that the bin actually gets into. And it's just left out. It's been left out 24/7, 365. I think the only time I've ever known it being taken in was a week at the end of 2019 when a standing person was looking after the bar. So it seemed to be that Mr. Greaves had gone on holiday and someone actually finally took it in at the end of each day instead of just leaving it on the pavement in similar states to what you see in those pictures.
Well, Mr. Burrow, my instructions are that the bin was, excuse me, emptied as and when required, and Mr. Greaves thought he was doing the right thing in having a receptacle for people who may smokers in his premises when they go outside to smoke, to comply with smoking legislation. We have a receptacle to put the fag ends in, but that generated a further complaint from you.
Yes, just to highlight the issue that the bin is on, and littering is part of the promotion of the licensing objectives. The licensee needs to look at some sort of littering policy.
Which licensing objective are you concerned about in that regard, Mr. Burrow?
Probably public nuisance and maybe public safety if the bin's left on the public pavement 24 hours a day and never taken in.
That's fine, Mr. Burrow. We'll have to agree to disagree. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Members, do members have any questions?
No, not at this moment.
Thank you.
No, I've none, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burrow.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know, I'm just at the time whether it would suit everybody. We just had a 5-minute break before we start on Mr. Cohen's and Mr. Greaves' case, give everybody a breather. I would just welcome a chance to have a quick word with Mr. Strickland and Mr. Chadwick and my 2 fellow councillors. A quick one. So if I could ask everyone to log out, apart from those I've mentioned, and we'll just have a quick word about it. And we'll see you in 5 minutes.